Have you ever asked yourself why Socrates needed to die? He is often seen as the epitome of reason, a man whose name is synonymous with critical thinking and intellectual integrity. His most famous contribution to philosophy is the Socratic discussion, a method in which two parties begin by admitting their ignorance and then systematically question their assumptions to reach a clearer understanding. It's a process without predetermined conclusions, and the final answers can be unexpectedly uncomfortable. Many believe this very approach led to his trial and execution. We are told Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, but was his choice to die purely an act of reason? Why did he reject the alternative of exile and willingly accept death by hemlock? Did he embrace this fate just to teach us a lesson in philosophizing? Could he not have spared the city he loved from the burden of 2,400 years of guilt for condemning perhaps the greatest figure in Western thought? Was his love for Sophia, the Lady Wisdom, or for another deity altogether? Socrates often described himself as following his mother's profession rather than his father's. He was a mediocre stonemason, but an exceptional midwife of ideas. Using this metaphor, one could say Socrates was better at birthing insights than carving dogma. By questioning the deeply held beliefs of Athenians, he dismantled the very truths they cherished. People form emotional attachments to their beliefs. This is what triggered hostility towards him, and he knew it. During his trial, Socrates himself stated that the real reason for his prosecution was not the official charges, but the resentment he had stirred among many citizens. But how could the Athenians hate a seemingly harmless sage, especially one who was also a war hero? Socrates had volunteered in 3 Peloponnesian wars, despite being older than many soldiers. He was married and had children at the time. Athens was ultimately defeated, but he demonstrated extraordinary bravery and selflessness. Surprisingly, Socrates did not strongly emphasize this in his trial. Even more intriguingly, he refused to accept a medal of valor for his deeds in battle. When young Athenians eagerly asked about his wartime adventures, he deflected the conversation back to philosophy, time and again. He refused to stoke the flames of nationalism. Yes, Socrates deeply loved Athens. He was a patriot in the truest sense, but not a nationalist. His love for Athens was not defined in opposition to another nation. He did not glorify war or Athenian exceptionalism. If he had a greater devotion than to Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, it was to Irene or Pax, the goddess of peace. But his philosophy took root in a time of war, a war in which Athens was not victorious. He could have easily leveraged his reputation to rally the youth in support of the war effort against Sparta. Instead, he did the opposite. He undermined the Athenian belief in their own supremacy, repeatedly reminding them they were not the chosen people. For a state increasingly driven by militarism and desperation, Socrates was an existential threat. Athens had locked itself in a brutal war of attrition, and it had only 2 choices: exile him or execute him. Socrates himself understood this tragic convergence of events. One could even sympathize with his accusers. Imagine their desperation to hold together the last remnants of Athenian order. In times of peace and stability, they might have honored him. But in their moment of crisis, Athens simply could not afford a peace-loving, revolutionary deconstructionist. And Socrates was not alone. Athens had exiled its great military commander and historian Thucydides as well. Yet the real threat Socrates saw was not outside the walls of Athens, it was within. This was not merely an execution, it was a tragedy in which every player acted out their role with conviction. Athens did what it could to preserve the dignity of its crumbling empire, and Socrates, perhaps the most devoted citizen of all, chose to die a patriot, defending his people from the dangers of collective narcissism. And this is a recurring theme in history. Societies swing between conviction and confusion, between unwavering certainty and moments of deep introspection. Athens, the naval empire, fell. But Athens, the concept, survived. With time, it overcame its tragic moment of narrow-mindedness and ultimately redeemed its greatest citizen. Did Socrates die in vain? You might say so. But remember, emotions are not always bad. Intense emotions worked against him at trial, but emotions of equal magnitude inspired Plato and his other students to defend him. And in their writings, they birthed Western philosophy in its most noble form. In a way, by his death, Socrates signed the book he never wrote. And so the legacy of Socrates the midwife lives on, not only in Socratic dialogue, but in the painful contractions of history, and in the hope for the birth of enlightened peace.